faithfully delivering value, unpacking great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Talks Books, and this is the second part of our French Revolution history series. In the last episode, I covered the start of the French Revolution, breaking down why it erupted, King Louis XVI's troubles, and how the early constitutional monarchy fell apart, ending with the monarchy getting abolished. Next up, I'll dive into the climax of the French Revolution, known as the Jacobin dictatorship era. From September 1792 to July 1794, in under 2 years, the revolution shifted from relative peace to widespread violence. After the Reign of Terror, the Thermidorian reaction kicked in, toppling the Jacobin dictatorship. The revolution moves into its final stages. But first, let's tackle the climax. That's the Jacobin dictatorship period. First off, we need to grasp what the Jacobin dictatorship was all about, and that traces back to 1789. When the Estates General met in May, representatives from all over France gathered in Versailles, making it a real buzz. As they say, birds of a feather flock together, so reps with similar views formed clubs to hash things out privately and build consensus. So, in public settings, they'd speak and act in sync based on their pre-agreed plans. In October 1789, King Louis XVI and the National Assembly moved to Paris, and these clubs relocated too. Out of these, the Jacobin Club packed the most punch. Jacobin comes from a Paris monastery's name, so naturally, the club meeting there was called the Jacobin Club. Early on, it was super inclusive, taking in anyone backing the revolution. Constitutionalist bigwigs like Lafayette and Mirabeau were members, with Mirabeau even serving as president. The constitutionalists and radicals balanced each other out, keeping the Jacobin Club's stances not too conservative or extreme. But that balance didn't last long. In the previous episode, we covered how the constitutionalists pushed for a constitutional monarchy, while the radicals wanted to go all the way to a republic. The two sides often butted heads in the Jacobin Club, neither backing down. In June 1791, King Louis XVI's attempted escape became the flashpoint. Constitutionalists still clung to constitutional monarchy and wouldn't punish him. Radicals fought back hard, demanding the monarchy's end, leading to a deadlock. In July, the constitutionalists gathered at the Feuillon Monastery, announced their withdrawal from the Jacobin Club, and formed the Feuillon Club. In September, the constitutionalists passed the 1791 Constitution in the National Assembly, declaring France a constitutional monarchy. However, after the constitutional monarchy lasted barely a year, Parisians launched a second uprising. The rebels arrested Louis XVI and forced the National Assembly to reorganize into the National Convention. On September 22nd, 1982, the National Convention announced the abolition of the monarchy and established the French Republic. Thus, the constitutional monarchy collapsed, and the constitutionalists disintegrated. So, when the First French Republic was founded, the Jacobin Club had already been controlled by radicals, and Jacobin became synonymous with radicalism. In the National Convention, the supreme authority of the Republic, the Jacobins held an absolute majority. This allowed them to rule France by manipulating the National Convention, a period historically called the Jacobin dictatorship. But the Jacobins weren't unified. After purging the constitutionalists, the remaining members rapidly split. They formed two major factions, the Girondins and the Montagnards. These names are quite unique, so let me explain them briefly. Gironde is a province in western France that still exists today. 3 leaders of the Girondin party came from this province, so it was called the Girondins. The origin of the Montagnards is even more interesting. National Convention, Girondin deputies sat on the right, while Montagnard deputies sat at the top left, higher up like on a mountain, hence the name Montagnards. Notably, since the Girondins sat on the right, they were also called the right. The Montagnards sat on the left, so they were called the left. This is how the terms left and right originated in modern politics. So, what exactly were the disagreements between the Girondins and the Montagnards? In short, there was a huge difference in how each side viewed the future situation. Before the Republic was established, everyone advocated for revolution. After the Republic was founded, the Girondins believed the revolution's goals had been achieved. It was time to restore social order, support commerce and industry, and put the country on track. The Montagnards disagreed. They argued that abolishing the monarchy mainly benefited the bourgeoisie, while ordinary people's interests weren't protected. So the revolution must continue until absolute equality between all people was achieved. Oh, this difference between the Girondins and the Montagnards stems from their backgrounds, social statuses, and interests. First, let's take a look at the Girondins. The Girondin leaders included Brissot, Condorcet, and the Rolands. Brissot was a well-known lawyer and journalist who was imprisoned in the Bastille for criticizing absolute monarchy. Condorcet and Roland were key figures in the late Enlightenment, with Condorcet's sketch for a historical picture of the progress of the human spirit. The sketch is a classic work, and Roland contributed to the revision of the encyclopedia. Madame Roland was well versed in history and philosophy, had deep studies of Rousseau, and was a central figure in Parisian social circles. So, before the revolution erupted, the Girondin leaders were already famous. Condorcet was even a noble, with the title of Marquis. This background and social status led the Girondins to value order more. After overthrowing the monarchy, they emphasized implementing ideals like democracy, human rights, and equality within a legal framework. This relatively moderate stance won the Girondins support from the property class. The bourgeoisie, involved in industry, commerce, and finance, hated absolute monarchy because it harmed their interests. After the monarchy was toppled, they felt their shackles were removed and the revolution could end. So the Girondins' proposals appealed greatly to the bourgeoisie, making them the bourgeoisie's spokespeople. Oh, the Montagnards were different. Their most important leader was Robespierre. Unlike the Girondins, in contrast, before the revolution, he was unknown. Robespierre was born in 1758 in Arras, northern France. At 6, his mother died. His father was long idle and eventually abandoned him, disappearing. Robespierre became an orphan, forced to live under others' roofs. Luckily, he was good at studying. In 1769, at 11, Robespierre entered the Louis le Grand School in Paris, which specialized in accepting poor but talented students. Robespierre stayed there for 12 full years, studying diligently and excelling academically. After graduating, he returned home to become a lawyer. While in Paris, Robespierre was influenced by Rousseau, especially captivated by his Emile. In this autobiographical novel, Rousseau argued that human nature is inherently good, but unjust social institutions corrupt people. Robespierre strongly agreed with this. Combined with his own humble origins, he developed deep sympathy for the common people. After becoming a lawyer, Robespierre often took cases for the poor pro bono. But overall, Robespierre lived a quiet life. He was plain-looking and low-key, so he didn't stand out. Without the French Revolution, his life would have remained ordinary. History works mysteriously. An average person, through chance, suddenly rises to power and changes history. In May 1789, Robespierre was elected as a Third Estate representative and traveled to Versailles for the Estates General. When the National Assembly formed, he became its representative. After the revolution erupted, the royal family and National Assembly moved to Paris, and Robespierre relocated too. This experience let Robespierre witness the king's arrogance and the privileged class's stubbornness firsthand, fueling his anger. He believed this unjust system should be overthrown ruthlessly. Then, following Rousseau's vision, build a society without oppression and with absolute equality. Radical ahead of his time, Robespierre opposed constitutional monarchy. He wanted to abolish the monarchy outright and establish a republic. Early in the revolution, this view didn't gain much traction. Robespierre's proposals were rarely adopted by the assembly, but he persisted undaunted, actively promoting his ideas. Statistics show early in the revolution, Robespierre spoke 276 times in the assembly, ranking 20th among all representatives. The less influential than Mirabeau or Lafayette, his frequent speeches made more people remember this young man. With radical views and an uncompromising stance, Robespierre's fame grew steadily. After joining the Jacobin Club, those sharing his views gathered around him, forming the Montagnards. Of course, Robespierre wasn't the only Montagnard leader. Danton, Marat, and Saint-Just were also influential. Before the revolution, they were nobodies. The revolution turned their fortunes around, making them leaders. The Montagnards' support base was the sans-culottes. So what were the sans-culottes? Simply put, they were commoners. Under absolute monarchy, nobles wore tight breeches with long stockings below the knees. The bourgeoisie adopted this style as upper-class standard. Halutes were expensive. Common folks couldn't afford them. They had to wear long trousers. So whether someone wore culottes became a mark of whether they were nobility or bourgeoisie. Commoners who didn't wear culottes were called sans-culottes. Sans-culottes were mostly small vendors, shopkeepers, artisans, and various laborers. Within the third estate, they were at the bottom, socially below the privileged classes, wealth-wise far behind the bourgeoisie. For sans-culottes, overthrowing the monarchy only solved half the problem. Next came reducing wealth inequality. That's why they backed the Montagnards, sharing their hatred of injustice and pursuit of absolute equality. In their eyes, the Girondins only cared about protecting bourgeois interests, becoming obstacles to the revolution. Now, we see the core divide between Girondins and Montagnard clearly. Though clarified, their conflict stemmed from both ideological clashes and vested interests, making reconciliation nearly impossible. As historian Miget wrote in this book, from the Republic's first day, Girondins and Montagnards fiercely debated wealth inequality. In their first clash, the Girondins struck first, attempting to put the Montagnards on trial. The Girondins seized on the September massacres. What were they? Last episode covered this. In July 1792, Austrian-Prussian forces invaded France. With weak resistance, they advanced toward Paris. This panicked Parisians who feared, counter-revolutionaries would exploit the chaos to undermine the revolution. In August, Paris established surveillance committees, arresting counter-revolutionaries, many jailed on mere suspicion, including the Queen's friend, Princess de Lamballe. In early September, Austro-Prussian troops captured Verdun, Paris's last defensive barrier, putting France in grave danger. Panicked Parisians rioted, storming prisons and executing thousands of suspects. Princess de Lamballe was brutally killed. These were the September massacres. The slaughter shocked France, especially terrifying the Girondins. They believed restoring order required first trying the massacre's ringleaders. The Girondins targeted Marat. Why him? Because among Montagnard leaders, Marat's rhetoric was the most extreme. Before the revolution, Marat wrote pamphlets specifically to attack the monarchy. Back then, there were many such people. Competition was fierce, and becoming famous was tough. So Marat was just an ordinary writer. After the revolution erupted, Marat founded the People's Friend newspaper. With sharp writing and radical views, he won a huge readership and was hailed as the friend of the people. After the Republic was established, Marat was elected to the National Convention. Using inflammatory oratory and strong public support, he wielded power there, reaching the peak of his career. Marat advocated harshly suppressing counter-revolutionaries. He even proposed implementing a dictatorship to completely wipe them out. These views were widely spread through the People's Friend newspaper. Now, the Girondins seized on Marat's extreme statements, accusing him, "It's because of you, Marat, shouting for violence all day, that sparked the September massacres. You must be held accountable and face trial." Not just Marat, but Robespierre was also attacked because he often promoted using violence and terror to solve issues. The Girondins saw him and Marat as obstacles to stabilizing social order. To bring them down, Girondin leader Roland personally took action. He went to the National Convention podium and told representatives that Robespierre and Marat orchestrated the September massacres to create chaos and seize power. If they're allowed to run amok, the Republic will be in danger. Roland suggested handing the Montagnards over to the criminal court for legal punishment. The Girondins' proactive attack worked well at first, putting the Montagnards in a tough spot. Yet Robespierre and Marat escaped punishment. How did that happen? Author Miget believes the main reason was the Girondins' lack of political experience. After Roland finished his accusation, many representatives agreed because they were also very dissatisfied with the Montagnards' radical policies. If they'd pressed on full force, the National Convention might have passed a resolution to send Robespierre and Marat to court. But who knew? The Girondins, thinking victory was assured, set aside the arrests to discuss other issues, giving the Montagnards a breather. On one hand, they defended themselves in the National Convention. On the other, they called for commoners to come support them. At that point, the Montagnards' advantage showed. Their organization in the Jacobin Club was strong, and their prestige among the masses was much higher than the Girondins. So the Montagnards were able to rally a massive force to pressure the National Convention. The Girondins lacked confidence and didn't dare to push hard. Eventually, the proposal to try the Montagnards just fizzled out. In political struggles, one side's retreat doesn't necessarily win concessions from the other. In reality, every step you retreat, the opponent advances, pressing closer and suffocating you, dismantling the Girondins' offensive. Afterwards, the Montagnards immediately organized a counterattack, launching the second confrontation between the two sides. The focal point was that the Montagnards demanded to put Louis XVI on trial. As mentioned earlier, on deposing Louis XVI, the Girondins and Montagnards were in agreement. After the deposition, the Girondins believed Louis XVI had lost his throne and was now a citizen of the Republic. His life and property were protected by the Constitution and must not be violated. The Montagnards opposed this. Their leader Danton argued that Louis XVI embodied the old regime, and trying him meant trying that old system. Robespierre portrayed Louis XVI as a traitor, a criminal against humanity, who must be sentenced to death in the name of revolution. The Montagnards repeated their tactics, inciting the sans-culottes to petition the National Convention, calling for Louis XVI's execution. They also declared that anyone protecting Louis XVI was a counter-revolutionary and would face severe punishment. Facing the fierce onslaught, the Girondins retreated once again. The National Convention tried Louis XVI and then voted to sentence him to death. On January 21st, 1893, Louis XVI, just 38 years old, was sent to the guillotine. His death marked that in the struggle against the Girondins, the Montagnards gained overwhelming dominance, and doom was about to fall on the Girondins. After Louis XVI's death, the Montagnards and Girondins engaged in their third and final confrontation. At this point, roles reversed. The Montagnards were aggressive, demanding to try the Girondians, while the Girondians were on the defensive, barely holding on. So, on what grounds did the Montagnards put the Girondins on trial? There's a Chinese idiom: if you want to impose a crime, why worry about lacking a pretext? This phrase means if you want to convict someone, don't fear lacking reasons. And it fits perfectly here. The Montagnards accused the Girondins of colluding with counter-revolutionary forces, both domestic and foreign, to overthrow the Republic. Specifically, what were these counter-revolutionary forces? Externally, mainly organizations like the Anti-French Coalition. Europe was largely made up of monarchies. Louis XVI's execution caused them extreme panic. Monarchs of these countries feared revolutionary ideas would spread, inspiring their own people to overthrow them. So in February 1793, Britain orchestrated the first coalition with the Holy Roman Empire, Spanish Empire, Prussia, and others, amassing hundreds of thousands of troops to invade France from all directions. Facing formidable enemies, French forces suffered repeated defeats, putting Paris in imminent danger. At this critical moment, rebellion erupted in the Vendée region, worsening the situation. Located in western France, the Vendée was predominantly Catholic farmers with deeply conservative values. After the French Revolution erupted, the Vendée remained largely unaffected, with farmers still loyal to the king and rejecting revolution. Because of this, many displaced nobles and clergy sought refuge there, turning the Vendée into a gathering place for domestic counter-revolutionaries waiting to overthrow the Republic. Two events directly triggered the Vendée Rebellion. First, Louis XVI's execution enraged Vendée farmers. Second, to resist the coalition, the Republic announced conscription of 300,000 men, harming Vendée farmers' interests against their will, which nobles exploited to incite rebellion. In March 1793, large-scale rebellion broke out in the Vendée. Peasant forces surged violently, sweeping across regions, catching government troops off guard and inflicting heavy losses. The Republic now faced threats both internal and external. So, how to reverse the situation? The National Convention formed the Committee of Public Safety, with 12 members, including Montagnard leaders Robespierre, Danton, and Saint-Just. The committee established the Revolutionary Tribunal to try counter-revolutionaries created by Danton. To increase efficiency, Danton drastically streamlined the tribunal's judicial procedures. He also ruled that defendants had no right to appeal tribunal verdicts. Using this institution, the Montagnards launched attacks against the Girondins. Robespierre accused the Girondins bear full responsibility for France's military failures. They collude externally with the coalition and internally with Vendée rebels, attempting to crush the young republic from both sides. Of course, Robespierre knew baseless accusations wouldn't suffice. The Girondins needed to be caught taking concrete action. On May 31st, 1993, organized by the Montagnards, Parisians launched their third armed uprising. Protesters surrounded the National Convention, demanding the arrest of treasonous Girondins to face the Revolutionary Tribunal. Just like the previous two times, the National Convention yielded again. On June 2, the National Convention ordered Girondins' arrest. Realizing all was lost, some surrendered while others fled. Subsequently, the Revolutionary Tribunal tried the Girondins. Brissot and Madame Roland were sent to the guillotine. Roland committed suicide in despair during escape. Condorcet also took his own life. Thus, the Girondins were obliterated, and the Montagnards seized power, marking the French Revolution's descent into terror and dictatorship. The Montagnards' first act was drafting a new constitution, the Constitution of 1793. If you only read the text, you'd think this constitution was remarkably progressive. It declared national sovereignty belongs to the people with governance following separation of powers. Parliamentary representatives were elected by the people with civil rights legally guaranteed. However, soon after, the Montagnards suspended the Constitution, citing emergency, transferring all power to the Committee of Public Safety, effectively establishing their dictatorship. Jacobin rule became Montagnard dictatorship. With absolute power, they mobilized national resources, rallying all French citizens to defend the Republic, igniting nationalist fervor. Within months, France's army expanded to 1.2 million. War fortunes shifted. The anti-French coalition was repelled, and the Vendée Rebellion suppressed. The Republic's gravest danger passed. Simultaneously, the Montagnards implemented terror policies, executing all counter-revolutionaries. But what defined a counter-revolutionary? Well, that was determined solely by the Revolutionary Tribunal. Eventually, criteria broadened absurdly. Even adultery was deemed counter-revolutionary. Some were executed merely for hoping the anti-French coalition would win, hope being a subjective desire. How could judges prove such thoughts? This reveals the sheer absurdity of the Revolutionary Tribunal's verdicts. Terror spread instantly. Massacres occurred in Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux, and across France. For rebellious determination, like the Vendée, the Montagnards believed they must show zero mercy. During the suppression of rebels, government forces carried out mass killings, aiming to wipe out local resistance completely. According to statistics, 400,000 to 500,000 people were killed, mostly civilians. This is the Vendée massacre. Connecting historical events, combined with massacres across the nation, all occurring in 1793. Thus, 93 became synonymous with bloodshed and terror, causing many revolution supporters to reflect. Must revolution involve terror policies? And where exactly should the boundaries of violence lie? This caused divisions within the Montagnards. The moderate faction led by Danton argued that since the Republic was now secure, terror policies should end. They proposed restoring the Constitution, safeguarding civil rights, and negotiating peace with Britain. Danton perhaps didn't realize his proposals echoed the Girondins' earlier stance. Thus, his fate would mirror the Girondins. To Robespierre, the revolution must charge forward relentlessly until all resistors were eliminated and absolute equality achieved. The moderate stance was undeniably regressive, a betrayal of the revolution. From then on, Robespierre saw Danton as another obstacle to the revolution that must be removed. First, Danton was expelled from the Committee of Public Safety, stripping the moderates of power. Then in March 1794, the moderates were arrested. On April 5th, the Revolutionary Tribunal sentenced Danton to death for allegedly plotting to restore the monarchy. Ironically, Danton had founded this tribunal. Now it sent him to the guillotine. It seemed a cruel joke played by fate. Danton's death marked the snapping of the last rein holding back the terror policies. Just 2 months after Danton's death, in 1794, in June, Robespierre enacted the Law of 22 Prairial. Key provisions. First, abolishing the right to legal counsel. Defendants couldn't hire lawyers. Second, judges could convict based on defendants' confessions or even mental state. Third, the only penalty for counter-revolution was death. This law escalated terror to its peak. Statistics show that from June to July, in Paris alone, the Revolutionary Tribunal executed over 1,300 people, averaging 18 daily. Victims weren't just nobles. Merchants, workers, peasants, even vagrants, widows, and children were executed as counter-revolutionaries. The entire nation of France lived in fear under this terror. But instead of making Robespierre reflect on his extreme policies, it convinced him enemies were everywhere. Why else would the Revolutionary Tribunal catch so many counter-revolutionaries? He became suspicious of everyone, his nerves stretched to the breaking point. One day, a 16-year-old girl came to Robespierre's house, curious to see what he looked like. The guards, overly sensitive, arrested her. They found a fruit knife in her pocket, which became evidence of her plot to assassinate Robespierre. The Revolutionary Tribunal sentenced the girl to death. Her father, brother, and aunt were executed as accomplices. The French Revolution had descended into utter madness. At this point, public sentiment began to shift. To the French people, Robespierre was no longer a hero but a devil. If he remained in power, God knows how many more would die. Only removing him could end the terror. Then an event occurred that hastened Robespierre's downfall. On July 26, 1894, Robespierre addressed the National Convention, claiming enemies of the revolution lurked among the representatives who must be purged. More specifically, he implied anyone present could be sent to the guillotine. This caused extreme panic among the representatives. They realized if they didn't fight back, they'd be next. The next day, Robespierre returned to the convention, urging representatives to purge counter-revolutionaries. Courageous rebellion, collective uprising. But to his shock, no one supported him. After stunned silence, someone shouted "Down with the tyrant," and others joined in. Robespierre was completely stunned. People suddenly saw that defying the tyrant stripped him of power. The reign of terror was shockingly fragile. The National Convention immediately passed a resolution declaring Robespierre an outlaw. He, his brother, and key Montagnards like Saint-Just and Couthon were arrested simultaneously. On July 28, 1894, Robespierre and 21 other Montagnards were guillotined. Since July was Thermidor in the French Republican calendar, this became known as the Thermidorian reaction, marking the end of the revolution's most violent phase. The revolution entered its final stage. The National Convention members who staged the coup became the Thermidorians, implementing measures like abolishing the Revolutionary Tribunal, closing the Jacobin Club, exonerating the wrongly accused, and returning property to victims. Laws enacted during the Jacobin dictatorship were gradually repealed. These measures surprisingly stabilized the situation, and Thermidorian rule gained widespread acceptance. But on economic issues, they made serious mistakes. During the Jacobin dictatorship, the maximum price law was enacted, fixing prices, especially bread, at relatively low levels. This hindered commercial development but ensured commoners didn't starve, which explains why, even during bloody terror policies, Parisians didn't revolt again. After taking power, the Thermidorians, eager to revive commerce, repealed the maximum price law. Bread prices instantly skyrocketed, currency rapidly devalued, making bread unaffordable for commoners. People are pragmatic. One moment they support you, the next, if you let them go hungry, they'll turn against you immediately. In April and May 1795, Parisians revolted twice, demanding bread. The Thermidorians suppressed these uprisings, barely maintaining power. But they lost popular support. Seizing this opportunity, Royalists began mobilizing. On October 5th, Royalists rallied 40,000 people to riot in central Paris, attempting to restore the monarchy. General Menu, responsible for Paris security, voluntarily withdrew due to dissatisfaction with the Thermidorians. Most of Paris fell to Royalists, putting the Republic in grave peril. As the saying goes, circumstances create heroes. In this crisis, Napoleon stepped forward. He was only 25. Due to his, close ties with Robespierre, Napoleon was under investigation. The Thermidorians distrusted him, but with no better military commander available, they reluctantly relied on him. Napoleon fully utilized his military genius, skillfully deploying artillery to disperse rebels, ultimately suppressing the royalist uprising. Now, thus Napoleon became the hero who saved the Republic. He was given more important positions and went on to defeat the anti-French coalition multiple times in subsequent wars. As his military achievement, strategic accumulation, Napoleon gradually seized control of the French Republic's military power. In 1799, Napoleon launched the coup of 18 Brumaire, overthrowing the Thermidorians and making himself first consul of the Republic. In 1804, the French Republic became the French Empire, with Napoleon crowned emperor, generally considered the end of the French Revolution. 15 years passed from the Revolution's outbreak in 1789 to Napoleon's coronation in 1804. France had returned to monarchy, seemingly feudal turmoil. Historian Mignet argues this view of the French Revolution is too superficial. So, first, France's social conflicts had reached irreconcilable levels, making revolution inevitable. Second, the revolution transformed human thought, embedding freedom, democracy, and rights as core ideals, while radically restructuring French society. In short, post-revolution France was fundamentally reborn. For example, although Napoleon established monarchy, he enacted the groundbreaking Napoleonic Code. Its core principle? Civil equality, meaning in property disputes, debt cases, and similar matters, courts judged cases on factual merits, never by social status, addressing evidence and reason alone. So Napoleon's emperorship wasn't mere monarchy restored. Moreover, his wars toppled feudal powers across Europe, turning French political ideals into continental reality. Truly, from 1804 onward, human history turned a new page. All right, that concludes our coverage of French Revolutionary history. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.